All right, everyone. So you guys should be turning in your assignment twos. Today, and we're gonna go over, or today we're gonna talk about kind of some advanced things. I don't, depending on the class I'm teaching, I sometimes get to these concepts, sometimes I don't. This gets into something called CSS transitions and CSS animations. Okay. These are once again things like you don't have to have these in a website by any stretch. They're not necessary, but they're kind of used to kind of, goujy up, make it a little fancier. And I'll show you some examples of where this comes in. So this is some advanced, CSS stuff. The first thing I'm going to talk about though isn't based on those two concepts, but actually it's based on a plugin. Okay. That plugin is referred to as Emmet. And, you may have seen me in some videos type HTML really, really fast, or you've seen me, write some CSS really, really fast, and you might wonder how I did that. So for people who, you guys are at a level now where I think I can kind of show you this, which is that most programmers, I can write HTML by hand, but there's actually like a little plugin that many coding programs have called Emmet. And what it allows you to do is do what's called expanding. And basically you can use shortcuts to write large amounts of code. Okay. So I gave you guys a link to the plugin. Okay. This is emmet.io. If you're using Visual Studio Code, Emmet is actually built into Visual Studio Code by default. If you are not using that, you can always download Emmet as a plugin for various, CD, services and third party and that kind of stuff. I believe if I actually just look for it. This is my list of my already installed ones. Maybe it doesn't have that. Well, anyway, it isn't here in the plugins, but it basically is installed by default. So anyway, I'm going to show you how we can use Emmet to write HTML really quickly. Okay, so I've already added today's workspace. I've downloaded it. This is exercise 15 or the root folder 15, transition and animation. And here in exercise 1, I have a HTML document. Okay, it's important that it's saved as an HTML document first, otherwise this will not work. Now, normally if I write a HTML tag, like let's say I do an H1, I would write it like this. Okay. What Emmet allows you to do is do what's called expanding. And what this means is that there's little shortcuts you can take. So for instance, if instead of doing all what I just did, if I were to type H1, and then notice how I didn't put the angled brackets like I normally would for HTML, and I hit tab, see how it automatically expanded that into a tag, and then I could write something. And to be honest, you can actually do this for any HTML tag. So I don't know, let's say section. Or, okay. So you can see how it can, make an opening and enclosing tag really, really quickly. Be careful though, because technically Emmet doesn't check to see whether what you typed is actually a real HTML tag or not. So if I just make up a tag like David Hurwitz, see how it did that even though David Hurwitz is not a valid tag. So, just be careful that what you're doing is actually a valid tag. Okay. In addition to just being able to expand out opening and closing tags, there's a couple of shortcuts that are really useful. if your page is already saved as an HTML document, normally we would have like doc type, right? And then I would write HTML. I'm actually using the expander here to do this really quickly. I can actually do all of this in one command. If I use exclamation point and then hit tab to expand, see how I got all of that automatically? It built me the doc type, the HTML, the head, and the body. Even threw a title tag in there for me. We haven't talked about this yet, but this is going to have to do with responsive web design. Okay. Not only that, actually, for certain tags, it'll actually kind of do some of the work for us. So for instance, let's say I'm going to make a style.css document and I wanted to link it here. Well, if I type in link and then hit the tab to expand, see, link tags are actually not double-sided. You know, they don't have an opening and closing tag, but Emmet will actually automatically add in the rel style sheet and add in the href for me automatically, which is really nice. Okay. And then I can type in style.css. Let's say I wanted to work with an image. So, you know, let's say I wanted to go out of this folder and then into this image folder. I could type img and then hit tab to expand, and you can see it automatically added in alternative text, which I may or may not have talked about this before, and the src, and then I could just kind of type it in. This is kind of giving me a file browser here. Okay, so see how that worked? Not only that, you can actually use Emmet to not just make one tag, but multiple tags. Okay. So let's say I wanted to make an H1 tag and then an H2 tag and then an H3 tag in order. I could actually do it like this. So I'm going to use the plus sign. Make sure there's no spaces between everything. It all has to be one word. So I'm going to do H1, H2, H3. And then if I expand this, it actually builds 1, 2, 3 all together. Okay, and then I could go back and type this in. So obviously, you know, you have to do a little planning ahead of time for this to, you know, be as effective. But if you know what you want, you can write it really, really quickly. If I knew I was going to have, you know, I don't know, 5 links, you know, 5 hyperlinks in a row, I could do 5, you know, A. You see I expanded all of that. Okay. Not only that, you can also do, you can work with parent-child relationships. So if you remember, a parent-child is like, if I were to have a header and then have, say, for instance, a headline inside of that header, we would say that this is the child, right? And the tag that it's inside of, which in this case is the header, this is the, you know, parent, right? Well, we can do that with Emmet as well. What I could have done to do this is if I do header, instead of using the plus sign, I can use the right-facing angled bracket, and that means to make a child tag. So if I do this, you can see how it made the header and then made an H1 tag inside of it. Or I'm going to undo this, and maybe I'm going to make an H1 and an H2 both inside the header. So if I do this, you can see it did an H1 and an H2 both inside the header. And to be honest, you can make as many children as you want. So for instance, let's say I had div, I could do a div with a section inside of that, and then there's a link inside of that section. Okay. So you can see there's the div, there's the section, and then the link inside of it. Okay. So you can do this to, you know, really quickly add a lot of content. You can even add dummy content, which is kind of fun. So let's say you want to have a paragraph, but you don't have any paragraph text, you could type in what I'm going to do is type in, so remember the right facing is for a sub or a child. I'm going to write lorem. Lorem means lorem ipsum, which is like dummy text. And what happened is if I hit escape or tab it's going to make a default paragraph one. If you want to say exactly how many words should be in this paragraph, you can type a number here. So if I say lorem 5, what that means is there's going to be 5 words in this paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or maybe I want to have, I don't know, 10 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So you can see how I can, use this to really, really speed up the process a lot. Another fun thing to do is you can add classes and IDs to things really quickly. So let's just say I'm going to make a div that has a class on it. And that class, let's just say for the sake of argument, is called container. I could write div dot container. Now remember, the dot signifies in CSS that we're creating a CSS class. So when I do this and I expand, you can see it automatically created the div with a class of container. Or maybe I want to have a section with an ID of, bio. Well, if I write section and then I put a hashtag bio, I'm going to hit expand or tab. You can see that it added that ID here. Okay. Now, a lot of, like I said, if this is kind of too much for you, don't worry about it. You don't have to do this, but I recommend that you might want to practice a little bit, spend a moment or two looking over all the documentation, because it really does make it really quick and easy to write an entire page. I mean, like I said, I'm going to start from scratch here. I'm going to add a page, come in here. Let's say I'm going to say, okay, I want a container, and then there's going to be 3 sections. Boom. Look how quickly I made. Okay. Now, that's not to say I couldn't just type it by hand, but this is faster once you get used to it. You know what I mean? Or actually, maybe each section is going to have, I don't know, a class of section. I don't know, add. Maybe there's each has a class of add applied to it. Okay. Technically, you can also use it for CSS. I must admit, I don't find it as useful for CSS. What it really does for CSS is if you have a CSS property, you can kind of quickly call it up by using just the short name for it. So for instance, let's say here, I did this. If I wanted to grab, for instance, font family, if I type FF and I hit expand, you can see how it expanded to, font family. Or FZ would be font size. To be honest, it's hard for me because I don't remember all of them, if I'm being honest, but you can do it. If you wanted to do grids, you could do D for display, or is it just DS for display? Yeah, display, or DG, display grid, GTT, grid template columns, that kind of stuff. So, you can decide whether this is useful to you or not. It took me a little while to kind of get used to the documentation here, but you can take a look at the documentation and see if that's useful for it. So, if it's useful, go for it. If it's not useful, then don't use it. But if you see me, typing something out and I kind of quickly do something like this, and you're like, how did Mr. Hurwitz do that so fast? It's because of Emmet, okay?